Hello and welcome everyone. We will start in a couple of minutes. We have a short Menti poll. Maybe you can all see it now. We will be starting with this poll before the introduction. My name is Fairuz Lutfi. I'm Circular Economy and Energy Efficiency Manager in WRI Mexico. And I'm glad to welcome you all to this webinar. We can see now the slide with the Menti poll. You can all go to menti.com and use the code 68939638. And we would like to learn more about everyone here joining us today. The first question is, where are you from? So we can see. Yes, of course. We will add that in the chat so it's easier for everyone to access it. And Natalie, can you share with all of us the code, please, in the chat? And thank you, Robin. I just saw your hand, and yes, thank you.
Of course, if everyone can hear me, the code is 68939638. It's also at the top of the screen here. The screen makes it a little difficult to read though.
I will add it here as well.
Thank you, Fanny.
So it's menti.com, and this is the code. So we have an international audience today, and as you will hear more in this webinar about this work. So it's Mexico, Ireland, US, Germany, South Africa, Brazil, Pakistan. Welcome everyone. From Chile, welcome Paula. I would like to confirm if everyone has been responding to the Menti poll. Since we have one more question to go, but we would like to, we can continue. Colombia, India, Germany. It would be nice to say hello in all of these different languages today, but welcome. And yes, please, we can continue. Natalie, with the other question. We can wait if someone else wants to include their response. We would like to learn more from where are you from, like where are you joining us today, and you can include that in the chat too. And the second question is, what sector do you work in? I will include so I included the information again in the chat. So it can be private, public, local government, national government, construction, or let us know, please. And it's nice to see everyone who is joining us. They finance, land, research to consulting, university. Thank you. Also, we keep receiving answers, and you can continue including your answers, but thank you so much. And so we're going to start now. Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Fairuz Lutfi, Circular Economy and Energy Efficiency Manager, WRI Mexico, and today I warmly welcome everyone to this webinar on the topic of green upgrading in informal settlements. With rapid population growth, rural to urban migration, and the expansion of urban boundaries, climate vulnerability continues to threaten cities globally. And low-income urban residents are particularly susceptible to being impacted by climate change, as they are more likely to live in high-risk areas, such as floodplains and steep slopes, and often lack access to basic infrastructure and services, like electricity and drainage, that could reduce these risks. Cities also account for more than 70% of global CO2 emissions and must play a leading role in climate change mitigation to avoid a global temperature rise greater than 1.5 degrees Celsius, while also improving the living conditions, health, and safety of their residents. In this context, what are some ways in which we can pursue an inclusive low-carbon pathway for urban-built environment? Well, we will hear about this from our speakers today. Our speakers today, and can we show the slide, please? Thank you, Natalie. Just to give you an overview, and I will introduce them in a few moments. Our speakers today are from across the world, working in different regions, Africa, North Africa, as well, Asia, Latin America, and they will speak to not just the best practices from their work on greening informal settlements and low-income housing projects, but also provide a much broader and richer context of need for inclusivity in urban transformation initiatives, a theme we are also exploring at WRI as part of the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator project, where we are working towards a more sustainable, inclusive, and low-carbon built environment through national roadmaps and subnational action plans. We hope that today's speakers and panelists can provide some insights to strategies for strengthening community engagement on building decarbonization. With that, I welcome our speakers, and we'll start first from Egypt. Dr. Salah El Hagar is a professor of mechanical engineering at the American University in Cairo. He holds bachelor and master of mechanical engineering degrees from Ain Shams University and a PhD from Washington State University. He's an expert in sustainable development, waste management and recycling, industrial ecology, and renewable energy applications, particularly in biomass and bioenergy. Well, welcome, Dr. El Hagar, and please, we will let you know when you have 1 minute left. And thank you, Dr. Salah El Hagar.
Thank you, Fairuz. Okay, today, inshallah, I'm going to talk about, the green upgrading in informal settlement. The main idea is to talk about the Egyptian rating system based on net zero model. Now, to discuss the core concept of the link between green building and informal settlements, I think it's very important to present this slide from the World Green Building Council, where if we implement green building, we can contribute to 9 of the Sustainable Development Goals. But that's of course, it's almost about a few years ago. But if you implement the green building based on net zero concept, you will contribute to almost about 14 Sustainable Development Goals out of 17. Now, Egypt Green Building Council was founded in 2012, and it is a non-for-profit organization, and we are representing Egypt in the World Green Building Council. Our mission is to promote the concept of green buildings and sustainability throughout Egypt. And part of our activities is to develop a green building rating system called Tarshid. Now, as you know, there is too many. There's almost about 85, 86 green building rating system worldwide. Now, green building started 1919 in UK through BREEAM. And in UK, there is almost more than 500,000 buildings certified with green or BREEAM. 8 years later, in 1998, United States, they developed LEED, and now we have 1.6 million building green, And also there is 39,000 commercial projects certified with green, and there is more than 200,000 LEED professionals. In Egypt, we have 4 rating systems. We have LEED, and we have EDGE, and we have GBRS and Tarshid. The total number of buildings in Egypt certified with green, it is less than 100. And this is some of the green building rating systems, and Egypt Green Building Rating System is one of them. Now, in 2015, I authored the book called the Sustainability and Innovation with the subtitle of Next Global Industrial Revolution. Now, this book talk about the why sustainability was not implemented as it was planned in 1992. The main reason behind this lag here is the lack of innovation, but not innovation in general, but innovation in the concept of net zero, where chapter 3 in this book talks about the net zero in a global sense. Not only a net zero carbon and net zero energy, but also net zero water, as well as net zero waste. Now, worldwide, there is almost 10 rating systems incorporated the concept of net zero, like, you know, in France, in Canada, in Brazil, in Australia, in South Africa, in the United States, in Germany, in UK, and in Egypt, as well as EDGE. And this is very important because net zero is coming very soon to be incorporated in our rating system. Now, in Egypt, we developed our sheet based on very important criteria. It has to be simple, easy to practice, to implement, and straightforward, innovative, and the most important part is to be cost effective. And this is a very important to promote the concept of green in Egypt. Now, our rating system based on 3 categories: energy, water, and habitat. Where habitat, it is all items without energy and water. Now, in 2015, we developed the first rating system, which is mainly Tarshid for affordable buildings, based on minimum savings in energy, water, and materials with 20%. Just about a few weeks ago, when the Egyptian government started the Hayat Karima program, we modified this rating system to be easy to implement and straightforward for the rural community, because there is almost 130,000 buildings will be incorporated within Hayat Karima project. And therefore, this building will be around 50 to 70 meters square in area. And therefore, we try to simplify this and came up with a very simple, cost-effective rating system called Tarshid Hayat Karima. Now we are working with the second edition of Hayat Karima, which hopefully by June or July it will be released to incorporate the net zero within, especially net zero water and net zero waste within Tarshid Hayat Karima. Also, in 2018, we developed the advanced rating system, which is the Tarshid community for new and existing community. And also we developed for residential, commercial, and schools based on 4 categories, based on, you know, Tarshid bronze, silver, gold, platinum. And if you achieve 40%, 49%, you can receive Tarshid bronze, 50 plus Tarshid silver, 60 plus Tarshid gold, and 70 and above Tarshid platinum. Of course, this rating system, it's an advanced, which include both prerequisite and credit. But when you go back to affordable building and Hayat Karima, we don't have any prerequisites. It is very simple, straightforward, and the cost, the total cost of the registration and certification will be around $400, which is very, very cheap and straightforward and easy to implement. And we implemented already the affordable building in some of the buildings in the desert, and we saved almost about 50% energy and almost slightly less than 40% water and about 25% materials. And this is very, very efficient for the rural areas, especially in the rural area where the buildings are very simple and the standard of living is a little bit low. In conclusion, which is very important now to talk about net zero concept, is the main indicator of resource sustainability. Now, people talks about net zero emission, net zero energy. I always try to be practical for the Egyptian community, especially in the rural area. And therefore, we focus mainly in Egypt in net zero waste and net zero water. Now, based on the World Green Building Council, 9 out of 17 sustainable development goals can be contributed within the ratings, the green building rating system. But if you incorporate the net zero within the green building rating system, we go up to 14 out of 17. And this is very important to promote the concept of net zero within our rating systems. Now, Tarsheed is a very simple rating system for both, by the way, for existing buildings to be converted into green and also for the new buildings, because we have very strong belief the main focus is not only the new buildings or new communities. Our main focus is the existing, because 90% or maybe more than 90% of the buildings exist. And therefore, the main challenge for the Egypt Green Building Council is to somehow upgrade the existing to be green, whether it's existing residential buildings or existing commercial buildings or existing schools or existing communities. One thing which is very important right now, we are working with Tarsheed healthcare facilities for existing and new healthcare facilities, and this is a very important part here. Our rating system, as I said before, it is simple, practical, straightforward, innovative, affordable, and easy to understand and implement. And the most important part is the cost effective. And based on the cost effective, I would like to comment on the sustainable buildings and green buildings. Most people say in the sustainable buildings are the same as green buildings. But for my own point of view, sustainable building can be green, but green cannot be sustainable. Why? Because when you talk about sustainable buildings, that is a building with cost-effective, socially contributed, and also economically viable. And therefore, all sustainable buildings are green, but not all green buildings are sustainable, because the rumor which is spread all over the world in the green building are very expensive. That is not exactly correct. And I'm sure if we consider the cost effective within our rating system, this will help a lot to promote the concept of green within our buildings. And I will thank you.
Thank you so much, Shukran, Professor Salah El-Hagar. And now we would like to welcome our speaker from Brazil. And I would like to let all the audience know that you can add your questions in the chat or the Q&A as it appears below in the screen, so we can register the questions for the session. Now I would like to welcome Nina Rentel. Nina has a bachelor's degree in political science from Carleton University, Canada, and political administration from FGV, Getulio Vargas Foundation, if that's correct, Brazil. She has been working with favelas for over 10 years, focusing on projects to end extreme poverty and housing. Previously, she was the CEO of TITO, a Latin American organization building housing and community development in more than 19 countries. Today, she is the Director of Social Technologies at Gerardo Falcoes, where she leads, I hope I pronounced that correctly, the innovative project called Favela 3D, which aims to end poverty in favelas of Brazil through a multidimensional approach and engaging governments, civil society, and the private sector. Welcome, Nina. We have 7 minutes, and we will notify you when you have 1 minute left.
Okay, thank you. What a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Nina. I'm the Director of Social Technology in Gerardo Falcoes. It's a not very easy name for non-Brazilians. We are an organization with a mission to end poverty. We want to make it a museum item before Elon Musk colonizes Mars. So we are calling out the Brazilian society to embark on a mission with us on Earth to end poverty before we see Mars being colonized. Really quickly, some numbers about favelas in Brazil. Unfortunately, in the last decade, we doubled the number of favelas. We have now over 14,000 favelas in Brazil, and a little bit over 14 million people living in favelas, which would be our 5th biggest state if it was all in the same territory. During the pandemic, we've seen the extreme poverty getting worse and hunger being back on the map in Brazil. So we started developing a project where we could really strongly tackle poverty in favelas that we work with. We are an ecosystem of social leaders in Brazil. So we are now in more than 3,000 favelas in Brazil. And with Favela 3D, we are doing our moonshot, our project where we want to really be able to tackle poverty in all of these favelas. Favela 3D is how we view favelas in the future. We view favelas as places that are digital, so that are connected to everything that technology can offer, that have dignity, so that the physical space has dignity for those who live there, and that the people in the favelas are fully developed in all their capacities. So we started Favela 3D as a methodology to tackle multidimensional poverty in a multidimensional form, as I said previously. And what we do is we have a mandala, which is our map of how we're going to bring all the solutions into each of the favelas. We are working in 4 favelas right now with this project, and we are working with social urbanism and housing. I'm sorry that it's in Portuguese, but I'm gonna translate it as I speak. Health, citizenship and peace culture, education, infancy, culture, sports and leisure, environment and sustainability, and income generation. So we start with a very profound diagnosis with data, quantitative and qualitative data, focus groups. Our social leaders are from the favelas or work at the favelas for a very long time. So we start from a very close relationship with the favelas, and we're going to decide all the solutions together with those living there, so that we have each solution for all these themes are going to differ from each favela. And when these solutions start working in the favela, in the territory, we have a program, it's called the Takeoff Program, where we work sort of a poverty graduation initiative, where we can create, design, and accompany each family in their own journey of overcoming poverty. With data and technology, we can see how each of these solutions are actually impacting each of the families that we work with in the favelas. This mandala is a development of what we lived in the first semester. We, together with the communities, we understood that we had to make a petal just for environment. It was previously in the housing and the urban and social urbanism, but each favela we work with brought environmental issue to the center of the discussion, because we're talking about sewage, we're talking about electricity, we're talking about garbage, which are always in the top complaints and demands of the favelas. So we created a more proactive and giving more weight to the environmental issue, also because we know that if we talk about favelas in the future, we need to talk about resilient cities and resilient favelas. So we brought light to it. And that, as I mentioned, we're in 4 favelas in São Paulo, in Rio, and also in the northeastern of Brazil, in Alagoas. And I want to quickly mention some of the projects that we've done. So we've been building capacity in the favelas with community leaders, capacitating them with peace culture, but also as environmental agents, so that their own favela participate in the construction and the sensibility of how we should all together understand the favela as protecting their environment. So we, together with the municipality, started this course. We also implement in all the housing that we're building, and I have to be here very fair that these technologies are not ours. We function as a grid articulator of NGOs, governments, and companies in Brazil that have the technology and connect them to the demand that we have in the communities. So here we work with biosaneamento, which works with biosewages. Each house that we build with a biosewage, biodegradable, I don't know how to say it in English, but it's a solution for sewage. We also partner up with a company that works with recycling, so the families can take their recycling. This container here, we put it right next to the favela, and the families can take the recycling garbage and they receive money for it in a card, a debit card, and it can then lead to a credit card depending on how much they accumulate in money. So we make garbage that the family has always disposed, and now they can make money off of it. And we're trying to close the cycle, making the favela being zero waste if we can design a solution for the organic garbage to also generate energy for the favela. We're going to have the first solar favela in Brazil. The middle picture is how at the end of 2023, favela Marte is going to be, and all the houses and public spaces are going to have solar panel. And on the right, we have the public spaces we've been building with another NGO that builds their housing, transitional housing, because they're going to have a lot of construction going on, but the transitional housing made of recycled material. So very quickly to finish my part, what we're doing is we want to put favela in the forefront of innovation and show the country that these places are the first ones who are going to be affected by environmental issue, and they could also be the places that are leading innovation in environmental and sustainability. And this is how we partner up with government and companies to take these technologies to the favela and work with the favela in a very strongly participation mode, for us to lead with example in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. Obrigada. And now we would like to welcome our speaker from India, Dr. Ronita Vardan. Dr. Ronita Vardan is assistant professor at the University of Cambridge. She is director of the Master of Philosophy in Architecture and Urban Studies, MAUS, and leads the Sustainable Design Group at the Department of Architecture. Dr. Vardan's work focuses on data-driven design of underrepresented built environments to reduce health and energy burdens in the warming climate. Dr. Vardan has instrumented data-driven methods that couples architectural engineering, artificial intelligence, and machine learning with social sciences to provide contextualized built environment design solutions in resources-constrained societies. She has extensive body of work in the slum rehabilitation housing in the Global South. We will hear about more about this work. Welcome, Dr. Vardan. We have 7 minutes. We will notify you when you have 1 minute left, and please.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Just a correction, I'm joining from the UK, but I'll be speaking on India. Kindly let me know when my slides are visible in the presentation mode. Is it fine? So today I'm going to talk about what does green upgrading in new informal settlements look like in India, and what does that new informal settlements look like using a data-driven approach. But when I talk about data-driven approach, what do I generally mean is I combine a lot of data in terms of environmental sensors from the built environment, along with I combine a lot of non-quantitative data, that is more qualitative data from the people. So these are basically transcripts of people who are talking to us informally, and then we combine to develop general strategies for net zero future, for occupant well-being, for energy and space efficiency. And I use a lot of innovative data sets, which include, apart from sensors, also films and videos. Moving ahead, our intention is to contribute to these 4 main verticals of sustainable development goals, which are mainly health, energy, and sustainable communities, with a little bit of contribution towards gender, though I'm not a very expert in it. And that's why our application triangle actually meets all these 4 criteria. So when we talk about urbanization tensions, which both the previous speakers have already talked about quite extensively, one of the major fact is that shelter is a primary need for the Global South in terms of urbanization, easing the urbanization tensions, which do have feedback loops in terms of both energy and health. And probably we can use these feedback loops to design better shelters for well-being. Globally, we can see there will be requiring of 300 million new housing units, and by 2030, and almost like adding 21 million new homes per year. And majority of these homes will come into into these low and medium income countries, most underrepresented currently in both research as well as in policy. Government of India in 2015 started a new vision for housing for all in order to build 22 million houses by 2022, which of which a significant portion would be belonging to LIG and EWS, which is economically weaker section houses by 20. And currently, when we stand at 2022, about 58% have been completed. This is in 2019 data. I do not have the current figure of 2022. So here I'll talk about what does these new low-income housing, which is housing for all, which is also affordable housing, looks like, and what sort of green initiatives are required, because this is a massive amount of built environment that would be added into the existing built environment, and they would have severe consequences in terms of climate as well as in terms of green futures. So I'm talking a case of Mumbai where you have a lot of contrast, and the major policy vision that the government of Mumbai took was in order to accommodate their urbanization pressures, they want to grow vertically, that is increase the floor space index from around 2.5 to almost 8. And by doing so, they are going to remove slums and put them into transitional housing. And so our interest was that what does the energy in terms of heat signature looks like in terms of these transitional housing. So in this, this is the representation of different typologies of urban forms existing in Mumbai. And this type 4 is the low income slum rehabilitation housing, which forms a part of the housing for all agenda, low income housing under the government of India's policy. So we found out that when we measured the heat stress index of this sort of form, it was extremely high. So the risk of heat stress of these sort of housing were quite extensive. So our intention was that if this is so high, then what happens when climate change happens? So how does this look like in reality? So what they are going to do is they're going to replace all these horizontal slums into these vertical towers, and they currently, this is a very recent image where you can see currently almost major parts of Mumbai, because Mumbai has nearly 50% of the population living in these sort of buildings or in slums or informal settlements. So they would be occupying these sort of buildings. So a major amount of the building stock in Mumbai would look like this in the very near future, if not they're looking currently. So what does this policy looks like? People move from the slums to this sort of a transitional unit for 2 to 3 years, while this vertical tower you see at the back is being built, and the rest of the housing land would be used for developing high-end residentials or luxury residentials. And it's a very win-win policy. Everybody wins. The slum dwellers gets a free housing. The government closes the housing deficit very fast. The developer gets the land for free for development of high-end housing. Given that, how does they look like? This is an example of one of those houses being already built. It's a simple house with a toilet inside, and this is how in reality it would look like if you go visit. It's one of the monsoon seasons where we visited, and you can see it's a hyper-dense, high-density, high-rise situation. And if you stand from at the center, you see the buildings like this. If you stand at the center and look right up, this is the amount of sky that is visible for the people who are living there, also for people who are transacting these places. So it's a very no-brainer that what sort of environmental quality of these houses would be, given that most of the houses would be opening up in leeward side. That means there will be lesser ventilation affected. We were interested to understand what would be the thermal consequences of that, what would be the thermal comfort consequences of that. So if 8M1 is the type of slums that they will be replacing these new type of housing, then M2 and M3 are the type of housing that is currently being built by these for accommodating these low-income residents. And we found out that if we have to choose the better of the two evils, there is M2 did have higher number of days which were compliant in terms of thermal comfort, but the distribution would be quite asymmetry, with higher floors getting better ventilation with higher thermal load, lower floors having lower ventilation with better thermal load. So there is definitely an asymmetry across the building. So we also wanted to see what happens when actually climate heating starts taking place, which we have just recently seen in the March and during the overheating hours. And we found out that majorly during 2020, 2050, and 2080 scenarios, indoor temperatures would be high over thermal comfort threshold and would be significantly higher at a range of, in 2080, it will be around in the range of 38 degrees, given no intervention is made. So we were interested to find out whether there is an intervention which will be better in not only greening these sort of building stock, but also providing more thermal comfort at a low cost price. So our intention was to find out, we know people have already adopted a lot of strategies. That means living in vulnerable situations, that definitely breeds a part of resilience. So in a short term, social behavior would actually convert into resilience and make a more better green environment, whereas in the long term, a policy support would be required. So for short term and long term benefits, we wanted to see what was the thermal comfort load in these sort of houses, and we are already witnessing that they are using a lot of cooling, energy intensive cooling devices for these for when they have shifted to these houses. So our intention was to see what was the preference. Obviously, being more warmer, being more cooler was the major preference in major part of these households. That means they were all feeling the heat of the heat, if I may use that word. So when we looked at what was the major cooling device that they were using, or cooling strategies that they were using, they're using mainly ceiling fan. AC is very less percentage, but the growth rate is abysmally high. It is around 25%. That means over very few years from now, by 2030, majority of the household will have energy intensive cooling devices. But when we ask them, given that there are all these strategies available in terms of curtains, air conditions, windows and doors, ceiling fan, what would be their most preferred option? They all chose around natural ventilation options, which was windows and doors. That means there is an opportunity to make these environment more green and yet more thermally comfortable. So we started seeing what was the thermal comfort range, which was around 28.8 to 29.8 for majority of the occupants. They preferred mostly opening of windows and most of the time in order for thermal comfort. And there was an inflection temperature beyond which people did not open the windows. So beyond 30 degrees, people would start closing the windows. Beyond a certain relative humidity, people would probably, so more the relative humidity, people prefer to open the windows. So there were strategies that was already being done. So when we look at windows in these sort of circumstances, we found out although windows is the most preferred strategy for cooling down, this is the condition of windows because of the cramped and hyperdense situation, and also because of the extreme privacy requirements of the people living in these sort of buildings. Given that, we also tried to see whether there was an energy intensive solution, which was basically ceiling fan and exhaust fan. I'm not talking about the ACs, which are also taking up quite rapidly. But we did find,
Dr. Vardan, sorry the interruption.
Yeah. I'll just complete. So we did find that there are certain strategies that work. So they do not need a lot more energy intensive devices to green the sector. So we saw that with no cost, these sort of interventions can be tackled up, like opening of windows and doors, curtains, or using of planters, whereas there can be a costly interventions like reflective paint or double glazed low emissivity glass or reflective tiles. So we combined all of them to see what was the cost and what was the comfort hours. And then we wanted to balance the cost and the comfort hours using the effectiveness. So we wanted to see whether it was more acceptable and it also had higher comfort value. So by doing that, we developed two scenarios. In one scenario, there is no cost available. There is only intervention in terms of creating awareness. And in other one, the government will provide subsidies for high cost building materials, which will lower which will make this community more greener in terms of energy interventions. So we tried to find out which were the strategies which had more degree of effectiveness, that was highly acceptable as well as low cost and having higher level of comfort ranges. So we did find that obviously the more double glazed would be more costly, but it will have more comfort hours, as well as it will be accepted. However, planters and curtains and ceilings and doors and windows do appear as one of the preferred strategy also for cooling. Given that we wanted to see, does design matter in that case? And so the more blue you see, that means it is highly thermally uncomfortable. The more red you see in any apartment, that means that apartment is more comfortable. And we can see definitely design matters in this case, that there are places where thermal comfort is available and there is no energy in terms of energy intensive devices are being used. So given that there is only one, this is one of my last but one slide where I talk about thermal comfort is also about cultural preferences, and there is the burden of this non-greening the sector would be extremely lie on one particular cohort if we move ahead, and that would be generally females in this case, which take up the burden of the heat. And so we have seen majority of the time the women become the shock absorbers. And to conclude my presentation, I would say there is a lot of, we have to take the advantage of vulnerability paradox in terms of mitigating the climate heat and greening the sector more in terms of access to more cleaner as well as low cost energy interventions. And obviously less is more. And if nothing else work, I always say, go back to praying. So thank you so much for your time. And this is from my side.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vardan. We wish we had more time. These presentations have been really interesting, and to learn more about these projects from around the world. After learning about these examples, we would like now to proceed to the Q&A session, which will be moderated by my colleague Sumida Malavilla. Sumida is the program manager for the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator and leads WRI India's work on building efficiency and urban energy transition. Sumida, over to you.
Great, thanks, Perus, and thanks everyone for your presentations and very interesting insights that we have gathered from across the world. I'll quickly invite two more speakers and panelists to our discussion. First, Mr. Emiliano Detta, who is a Deputy Director with KfW Mexico. Emiliano is a sustainable finance professional with more than 15 years of relevant experience in development banks and the private sector. He also works at KfW on the implementation of projects to foster financing for sustainable cities, climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. We welcome you, Emiliano. And the next person I would like to invite is Ms. Robin King, my colleague at WRI Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. Robin is a Director of Knowledge Capture and Collaboration at WRI. In this role, she promotes collaboration across WRI's international network to better integrate urban planning, land use, and sustainable transportation. And she also works on policy matters in the Americas and Asia. So I welcome Robin and Emiliano to this discussion. Just to sort of take a step back and also, probably my first remarks are directed at Robin. Robin, we have at WRI been, really looking at some of these transformations which are needed in cities to work towards more inclusive, inclusive societies. I believe that you have a small, video to show and along with the remarks. So we can quickly play that video while you also provide a remarks. So I'll just request my colleague Natalie to share the link to the video.
Please let me know if you can also hear the video. Is there a sound here?
Not yet.
I don't hear the video. I don't hear it. But I can provide some So it probably will be easier. Just
Okay.
Go ahead, Robin.
these are some images that have gone along with some research that we did over several years, talking about the World Resources Report towards a more equal city. And the image that you see right now is an image of an informal settlement, and some of the interventions and policies and transformations that can turn it from being non-sustainable, non-inclusive, and a problem into a thriving part of a city. This work is part of the World Resources Report that's available at www.citiesforall, that over the course of 6 years produced 17 different, or I guess 18 different papers looking at certain sectors. And I was the main author of the thematic paper on housing, where we talked about informal settlements, and we talked about the need for participatory in situ improvements, much like the Ronita Vardan mentioned in terms of the project, that of how important it is for individuals to point to their own needs as well as their own solutions, so that policies aren't imposed upon them. And in different contexts, that's going to be quite different. As a result of all of the work that we did, we came up with 7 broad transformations that imagined, or that focused on reimagining service provision, that really talked about infrastructure design and delivery and alternative service provision modes. One on including the excluded through data collection, which is sort of a key in all 3 presenters today, as well as taking into account informal urban employment, which we know takes place in a lot of informal settlements. And as we're thinking about their needs, it's not just sort of the housing sort of and shelter needs, but it also is inputs for productive employment. And then sort of the enablers of change, thinking about financing and subsidies that play a key component in sort of each of the speakers, urban land management, and realizing that land is a scarce resource that needs to be utilized, where the design component that the last speaker sort of mentioned is so important. And lastly, governance and institutions, and the importance of alignment, and that you have different levels of government working together and working with the community, not against the community. So I would invite all of you to take a look at our work, in addition to the work on housing, and sort of the importance of housing as a place where services are accessed, right? Whether we're talking about energy, water, sanitation, that lead to then those health and education sort of in quality of life outcomes, that we also then have case studies. And one of the case studies was on the Kampung Improvement Program in Surabaya in Indonesia, where you had the government working with the local university and with communities. So really thinking about how you can construct alliances that can work together, that can tap into the knowledge and energy of those communities to identify their problems as well as solutions, and things that have worked, whether they're traditional kinds of approaches that have worked, that I think sort of in the chat, there have been some questions about, or sort of some of the newer, higher tech kinds of interventions.
Great. Thanks for that, Robin, and linking this back to the work that we do at WRI on the WRR. The link to the video is put in the chat box. I next would like to actually hear from Emiliano. Based on what you just heard from our different presenters, I'm sure there are examples from the work also ongoing in Mexico. Could you talk, briefly about some of the experience that KfW has had as a development bank in Mexico on green upgrading of, informal settlements? What are some of the, collaborations that you have had as a part of this? What are some of the challenges? Could you reflect a bit on that, Emiliano?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, from our side, we have been working with the government of Mexico since 2012, now more than 10 years ago, in a program that we call Eco Casa. which is basically focused on social housing in, and in new buildings. Basically, the idea was to support developers, private developers that were building communities, basically, and that they should, incorporate sustainability elements into these new buildings. We started basically with energy efficiency as a focus because of our mandate. Our mandate, the German corporation here in Mexico, is focused on reducing CO2 emissions. But we quickly realized that this sector is actually one of the least contributors to climate change, right? So I think the priority, as always, when you work with these vulnerable communities, is improving their lives, right? First, and attending their needs, as Robin said in her intervention. I quite agree that we need first to ask the communities what they need, and then see, what we can do. Of course, there's several technologies that have been deployed by this program. For example, solar water heaters, insulation, also water saving measures, which are very important in Mexico. And this reflection, but of course we had many issues because, for example, in Mexico, many of these new developments were developed. Land is an issue, land costs, and many of these developments are being built in areas that are far away from cities, which is, of course, this has been corrected through time, but at the beginning of the program, this happened, right? And of course, after some time, we corrected this, and we have indicators. It's very good to see that even in Egypt, you have very similar criteria, focusing on energy, water, and the urban, let's say, environment. And of course, these are very important things that we need to focus, right? And of course, people, the technologies that you implement have to be appropriate, and for each, let's say, area, climate zone, as we call it in the program, right? There's areas that are very hot and humid. For example, in Mexico, we have in the south of the country, it's very hot and humid, but in the north, it's very hot but dry, or in the center, we have more temperate weather. So in considering these different climate zones, you have to consider different technologies, right? And different solutions. And of course, each community has different problems. In Mexico, for example, a big issue we have now is water. Water provision. Even most people are, they have tubes, or water infrastructure. They don't get enough water every day because there's issues there. So, for example, rainwater harvesting technologies make some sense, or even just storage. Right, just water tanks, just as basic as that, because in the end, these people are very vulnerable, and we have some, lessons learned from the program. We have seen, for example, if you install a solar water heater in a hot, humid climate, which was not from our program, but for other government programs, you see they sell it, right? Or even a technology that is very good, like, for example, efficient boilers, right? That they also sell it because they don't, because electricity in Mexico is subsidized, right? So people prefer using electric heaters, even if that's more inefficient, right? But the cost for them is lower. So these kind of considerations you have always to have. Also, there's a lot in Mexico, people steal a lot the electricity. So even if you build new buildings with the good intention of trying to, have a formal settlement instead of an informal, people are, it quickly converts, if you don't have a good community management, into an informal settlement. So I think it's very important to consider that all these in new buildings or even in existing buildings, and even more in existing buildings, the first thing you have to do is to work with the community, right? And focus on intervention together with the community. So you make sure, there's capacity building. That's very important, which we, to be honest, in Ecocasa at the beginning, we did not have very well. It was a massive program. We have more than 60,000 houses built. So, it was tough to control, let's say, but, and that's another complicated thing. Another thing, more like, just to summarize and to end my intervention right now, is I think also the financing of these things is very tough. It's not easy. You need to combine. I think for new buildings, it's a good, let's say it's a good approach, because you have a mortgage or something you can build upon, and you have land rights and everything, right? That's another very basic thing. But in many informal settlements, they don't even know if they own the land, right? So you have to figure that out first. The basics, take care of the basics before the sustainability sometimes is easier, no? It's more important, right? So land ownership, basic drainage, basic electricity provision, the connections, sometimes these things fail, right? And also the financing is very tough, and you need to mix it with subsidies. There needs to be enough political will that the donors understand this, or the government understands this, that they have to put some money that is not going to be recuperated, and it's a subsidy for these people, and maybe a small portion of this can be recuperated by microfinance, or can be recuperated by other means, right? But to be honest, for us, it has been a very interesting experience, but we definitely need to learn much more and improve many things, and continue, trying to, listen more to the communities.
Great, thanks for that, those remarks, Emiliano. It's a very different perspective, I must say, from what we've been hearing from, on-ground action, as well as, some of the data that is going into designing such interventions. So it's interesting to hear from a development bank for a financing perspective. In the interest of time, I know we have very limited time, but given the really interesting presentations made by our speakers today, I am inviting the remaining speakers, Dr. Vardan, Professor El Hagar, and Nina, to this quick, rapid round of Q&A. I'll start with my first sort of question for Nina, and then I'll move on to Professor El Hagar and Dr. Vardan in the end. So Nina, you spoke about the Favela Marte project. I'm sure I'm getting the pronunciation wrong, but can you talk a bit about some of the collaborations that have happened as a part of this project? It's looking at a very important ambition of installation of solar panels. Can you talk about your collaborations and any challenges that you have faced so far as a part of this project?
Yes, thank you. I think it goes very in hand with what Emiliano and Robin were just talking about. Favela Marte, we've been working there for 1.5 years now, and it started off with a great articulation, so bringing in the state government and the local government to work with us in the whole process of legalizing the land, so land ownership. It's the part of the territory is public, part is private, so the own municipality has been facing their own challenges to legalize the land. We had a great news last week, so we finally finished this part together with the municipality. And what helps all the actors to work through these challenges is showing that we've been working together. So that has been really the strong point of the project. Us as the articulating NGO who did most of the funding, we have the local NGO, the everybody, their own favela created their own NGO. It's not formalized yet, but it's an institution, like an association in the favela. And we have a lot of other companies and a lot of other NGOs with us. So showing the society that we've been working together has been the strong point, and that's how we've been able to move forward in public policies and legal issues in the municipality, in the local government, and also in the state government. The state government is executing the construction of the housing is going to be done by the state government, and there is a lot of difficulty to influence how this is going to be done. So there's a status quo of building social housing in São Paulo, in Brazil. So we tried to influence how we could propose new designs, like new architecture based on what the community has been telling us on all the social participation workshop that we've done with our architect. But it's very difficult to influence one project in our big development company in São Paulo to make everything different from the public policy that's in place. But we have been able, due to the innovative aspect of the project, to bring them really onto the project, and they have been working with us, keeping the innovative side in mind. So being able to put the solar panels in from a private partnership into a public construction has been a great advancement. We were able to negotiate a budget for us to be in the budget, and then bring in other private companies who would help us finish what we think are main characteristics that the house should have, such as being properly built, ready for an expansion, so that people will expand in an organized way and not putting in risk the structure when they expand, because we know that happens, and other sort of ways. So bringing a little bit more about how we're working housing in the Favela Marche. This has been a little bit of how we've been working together, as well as financing models. So the government is financing 80% of the house. Gerando Falcões, with civil society, we're financing 20% of it. The families are going to be in the regular financing system that CDHU, the public company, always uses, and the local government is financing all the urban structure, which we're already also working with through our architect. So I'll end here, but a little bit about all the challenges that we've been facing, as well as great advancement that we've had.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Nina. Very interesting up to hear about some of the innovations being kept in mind while you make these collaborations and look at the financing for these interventions. My next question is for, since we were talking about innovations, Professor El-Hagar, with the Haya Karima project, it's one of the first kind of projects that brings in more than 20 ministries and agencies, and some 23 civil society organizations which are working to implement this project. Again, similar question to what I asked Nina. What has been some of the the challenge in achieving this kind of implementation, this kind of collaboration for the implementation of the Haya Karima project, and how is the Tershid rating system integrated with this particular project? If you could reflect a bit on that briefly.
Thank you for the question. Haya Karima, it's one of the major or mega project in Egypt, because they will upgrade about 60% of the total population of the rural community. And of course, they started with the infrastructure, and now they have the second phase, which is building more than 120,000 units. And these units will be ranging between 50 and 70 meters square. And therefore, this will be small units. And we provided the government with the green rating system, which is very simple to the contractor and to the designer to implement, because we have a strong belief, and if this system will be expensive, nobody will expand this kind of approach. But we have very strong belief, and green building has to be cost effective. What I mean by cost effective, if you pay, say, for example, $1,000 then you have to get this $1,000 back within less than a year. And that is our estimate. That's our estimate. And we try to promote the concept of green building and green community all over the country. And we are helping the government on this area. But again, Haya Karima, it's a new project, still in the initial phase. But very soon we will have a lot of accomplishment and a lot of valuable results related to sustainability and related to green building and green communities.
Great, this is good to know, and we should definitely stay connected to know more about how the project shapes up. Very interesting to know that rating systems can actually become very affordable, the common complaint being that they are very expensive. So good to know that how you have managed to bring down the cost and save money for the project as well as for the occupants of these kinds of housing projects. My last question is for Dr. Vardan. Dr. Vardan, really fascinating work. The research that you have been doing, I have been following it for quite some time now. Just if you had to think about, three interventions from the policy perspective, listening to, all our speakers here, all this fascinating data research that has been collected from the slum rehab housing, from the informal settlements, what are some of the, top three implications for policy, or even if you have to just focus on one, and you have about 2 minutes to, concisely present these thoughts. Thank you.
First of all, Sumedha, it's a big question to respond in 2 minutes. So I will, what I have seen over and over again during with my experience with here, as well as fantastically being copied elsewhere in the global south, in other cities, especially in Ethiopia, very similar policy, very similar problems. And so what I have seen is that the disconnect between how people actually use spaces and how people actually transition to a newer form of energy use or technology in that sense, it needs to be included in the policy itself. There's a lot of opportunity though, because these governments have special purpose vehicle for these sort of development. So it's more fast tracked, it's more cost effective. So there is less bureaucracy involved in the getting permissions for building these processes. Interestingly, the people who actually would live in, they only get to consent whether they want to live in these houses. They do not have a sense of what sort of space that they would be going into. So when you talk to these people, the majority of the time we find the disconnect lies there. So it's like they go through this somewhat like a marriage. They enter these houses, it's an honeymoon phase. For the first time they have toilets, best in the world. So the women, especially women, do not have to restrict food intake. It's very good. Energy, then slowly realize that energy bills and health bills are going up. So that means there's a disconnect when in terms of housing as a shelter and housing as a verb in policy making. So we have to, in policy has to, what if I may say, the policy has to look beyond looking at housing as a shelter, at least for the next 10, 20 years from now, at least till 2050, it has to cater to what would housing contribute, both in terms of not just providing better shelter, but also in terms of the climate goals of the country, both in terms of energy goals of the country. It's a huge energy security burden that we might face in the next future if we don't estimate the correct energy use now. And that will be a major disconnect. That's all from my side. But then I think there's a lot to talk about this. I can go on for hours,
I know that, and we have discussed this before as well, but these are really good words to wrap up our session, housing as a shelter versus housing as a verb. And I think all our speakers have spoken about how this can become more about living conditions. It's not just about low carbon buildings, but also about how they provide comfort, increase productivity of occupants. So I think these are really good thoughts, and something which we would definitely like to pay attention to as we move along the Zero Carbon Buildings Accelerator project. We'll end here, and I would like to thank all our speakers, panelists for their time, and also our attendees. There have been some conversations going on in the chat box on requests for more information. There's a lot of interest in reaching out to you, reaching out to some of the speakers. So I'll thank everyone, and yes, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.